All characters and events are fictional. Any resemblance is coincidental. And if you believe that every lie eventually leaves proof, stay with me. The priest leaned closer to me. Not enough for anyone else to notice. Not enough to cause a scene. Just enough for me to hear him. He isn't inside. That was the moment I stopped grieving, because grief is loud inside your body. It floods you. It collapses you. But clarity is silent, and I have never felt more silent in my life than I did standing beside my husband's coffin, in front of 200 people. While the church bells echoed outside, I didn't react. That was my first decision. Because when a priest whispers that the man you buried 3 days ago is not inside the coffin, you don't scream, you listen. My name is Ava Hart. I'm 36 years old, and until 10 days ago I believed I was married to a man named Daniel Cross. Believed. That word matters. Daniel died in a car accident on a rainy Thursday night. Single vehicle collision, no other cars involved, highway barrier, instant death, they said, closed casket, they insisted. Severe trauma. I signed the release forms without shaking. I cried at the hospital. I fainted once, convincingly enough that even I almost believed it. But here's what no one in that church knew. Daniel had been acting strangely for 6 months before he died. Phone calls taken outside. Insurance policies updated. Passwords changed. One specific sentence repeated twice in 1 week. If anything happens to me, trust the paperwork. Trust the paperwork. Men who say that usually expect something to happen. The church was full. Black suits, whispers, perfume, old money. Daniel had friends I never met. Business associates who looked at me with sympathy. And something else. Evaluation. Like I had just become an asset. His brother stood in the front row. Ethan Cross, calm, controlled, dry-eyed, too dry-eyed. He met my gaze once, held it, then gave me the smallest nod. Not comfort, confirmation. That was my second decision. I did not cry again. The priest stepped back after whispering those words. He isn't inside. And then he resumed the ceremony as if nothing had happened. Ashes to ashes, dust to dust. The organ played softly. People bowed their heads. And I stared at the coffin. Polished mahogany. Brass handles. Heavy, too heavy. That's what I noticed first. Not the whisper. The weight. 4 men struggled slightly when they carried it earlier. I had watched carefully, because when you work in compliance, like I do, you learn something important. Details betray people. 6 months before Daniel's accident, he transferred a life insurance policy from a standard payout to something layered. Primary beneficiary, me. Secondary beneficiary, a holding company. Not a person, a company. That's when I hired a private investigator, quietly. Not because I thought he was cheating, because I thought he was planning. Planning what? I didn't know yet. But men don't restructure assets before random accidents. The priest finished the prayer. People lined up to place white roses on the coffin. I stood beside it, composed, observing, counting, because something else didn't make sense. The hospital had not allowed me to see his body. Identification already confirmed, they said. By whom? His brother. Ethan signed the visual confirmation. Not me. That was my third decision. I did not fight it, because sometimes the fastest way to expose a lie is to let it continue. When the last guest placed their rose, the priest leaned toward me again. His hand rested gently on the coffin. I have performed funerals for 27 years, he said softly. I know the weight of grief. He paused, then barely moved his lips. And I know the weight of an empty box. My heartbeat did not change. That's how I knew something inside me had already accepted this possibility. Empty, not inside. Which meant one of 3 things. 1. The hospital lied. 2. The family lied. 3. Daniel never died. Only one of those options terrified me. The coffin was lowered slowly. Soil fell in soft, controlled shovels. People cried. Ethan placed a hand on my shoulder, firm, possessive. "You're strong," he whispered. That wasn't sympathy, that was assessment, as if he needed to know whether I suspected anything. I turned to him. "Was he peaceful?" I asked quietly. Ethan nodded. "Yes." He didn't blink, and that's when I knew. He never saw a body either. That night I did not go home. I drove to Daniel's office, used the key I wasn't supposed to have. The building was dark, security alarm disabled. Someone had already accessed it, not broken in, accessed, authorized code. His desk was clean, too clean, files gone, hard drive removed. But they missed something, because people always miss something. Inside the bottom drawer, taped to the underside, was a small black envelope. I knew it was there because my investigator told me Daniel had been hiding documents. Inside the envelope, a passport. Not Daniel Cross. Different name, different nationality, same face, and underneath it, a departure ticket, dated tomorrow. That was when I stopped being a widow and started being patient, because if Daniel wasn't inside that coffin, he was planning to leave, and if he was planning to leave, someone helped him. Insurance payout pending, death certificate filed, assets transferring within 48 hours. Everything timed perfectly, too perfectly. The next morning I didn't call the police. That would have been emotional. Instead, I called the insurance company and asked one question. "When does the payout clear?" They said, 48 hours after burial confirmation, which meant today. At 3:14 p.m., the transfer was scheduled. At 3:16 p.m., Daniel would officially be worth more dead than alive. At 3:20 p.m., whoever orchestrated this would relax. And that was the mistake. Because at 3:18 p.m., I made my fourth decision. I requested an exhumation order. And I didn't tell Ethan. The coffin was opened at 7:42 p.m. Police present, coroner present, priest present. Ethan arrived furious. "What are you doing?" he demanded. I looked at him calmly, verifying paperwork. The lid creaked as it lifted. The officers leaned in. The coroner stepped back, and the priest closed his eyes, because he already knew, inside the coffin, was not Daniel Cross. It wasn't even a body. It was weighted sandbags, carefully arranged, precision, planning, fraud. Ethan's face went white, not shocked, exposed, and that was when I understood something much worse. Daniel didn't fake his death alone. He couldn't have. The insurance policy required medical confirmation, body identification, burial documentation. Someone in the system helped him, and someone in the family signed it. But here's what no one there knew. The police were not there because of my suspicion. They were there because of Daniel's mistake. Because the departure ticket I found was for 9:30 p.m., tonight, International Terminal, under the second name. Daniel thought he had time. He thought the coffin would buy him 48 quiet hours. He didn't know I had already forwarded the passport copy to federal authorities, and he definitely didn't know that I wasn't the grieving wife, I was the audit. And this was only the beginning. The coffin wasn't empty. It was deliberate. Sandbags, carefully positioned, the exact weight of a grown man. That wasn't panic improvisation. That was rehearsal. Ethan kept shouting, "How could this happen? This is insane. This is disrespectful." But he wasn't looking at the coffin. He was looking at me, trying to measure what I knew, trying to calculate how far ahead I was. That's when I realized something crucial. If Daniel was planning to disappear, he would have needed 3 things. 1. Official medical confirmation. 2. Controlled body identification. 3. A sealed burial process without interference. Hospitals don't just lose bodies, unless someone ensures they don't look. At 8:03 p.m., the airport security division called me back. I had flagged the passport. They confirmed a boarding attempt under the alias. The man had checked in, He had passed initial ID verification, but secondary screening triggered the alert. He was being held quietly, alive, breathing, real. Daniel Cross was not dead. He was 10 miles away, sitting under fluorescent airport lights, believing he had won. But here's where it gets complicated, because when I arrived at the airport, I wasn't alone. Ethan followed me, which meant one of two things. He was innocent and furious, or he was involved and panicking. And I still didn't know which. The holding room was small, 2 officers, 1 metal chair, and Daniel, alive, no bandages, no injuries, just slightly different hair. He looked up when I entered, and for the first time in 11 years, he didn't smile. He didn't deny anything. He just stared, like I had broken the script. "You weren't supposed to know yet," he said quietly. "Not I'm sorry, not I can explain, just calculation." Because this was never emotional. This was operational. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I asked one question. "Who helped you?" Daniel glanced at Ethan. Only for half a second. But it was enough. Ethan stiffened. And that's when the real fracture started. Because Daniel wasn't planning to take Ethan down with him. He was planning to leave him behind, the insurance policy, the secondary beneficiary company. It wasn't random. It was co-owned, half Daniel, half Ethan, which meant the plan wasn't just to fake death. It was to trigger payout, transfer assets, disappear with liquid funds, and leave me holding grief. But the plan had a flaw, because Daniel underestimated something fundamental about me. He thought my job made me boring. He forgot it made me precise. 6 weeks before the accident, Daniel requested certified copies of my signature from joint filings. At the time I said nothing, because people preparing fraud always leave a trail when they think you aren't looking. He had also adjusted vehicle insurance, increased collision coverage, decreased liability. Why? Because a single vehicle crash minimizes investigation. He picked a rainy night, low visibility, minimal witnesses, pre-selected highway, all of it clean, except one thing. He forgot that real accidents leave chaos. And Daniel hated chaos. The police asked if I wanted to press charges. I said no. Not yet. That surprised them. It surprised Daniel more. Why? He asked me. Because I needed him comfortable. Because when people believe they still have a chance to negotiate, they reveal everything. And that's when something happened that almost shifted the entire story. The coroner's office called. There had been a body, a real body, admitted under Daniel's name, severely disfigured, unidentifiable without dental records. But Daniel's dental file had been submitted in advance, submitted by Ethan, 3 days before the accident. Now the story wasn't just fraud, it was homicide, because someone else had been buried in Daniel's coffin, someone real, and that's when even I felt something cold in my chest, because I didn't know that part. Daniel looked genuinely shocked when officers mentioned the body. That was not performance, that was fear, which meant someone else escalated the plan. Ethan. The investigation widened overnight. Security footage from the hospital revealed a transport switch, private ambulance, after-hours intake, clerical override, all tied to a third-party logistics company, owned, quietly, by Ethan Cross. Daniel hadn't planned murder. He had planned escape. Ethan had planned profit. The brothers stopped speaking inside the interrogation room. That silence told me more than any confession, because Daniel thought he was orchestrating a clean exit. Ethan turned it into a permanent one. And neither of them realized I was already 3 steps ahead. The insurance company froze all assets. Federal authorities entered the case. Media started whispering. Widow uncovers staged death. They didn't know the half of it, because what they didn't know was this. Daniel had already wired a small test transfer 2 months ago, $120,000, offshore, to a location I recognized, which meant this wasn't his first attempt. He had tested the system, and it worked, until it didn't. But here's where the tension turns, because even with Daniel caught, even with the coffin exposed, even with Ethan implicated, something didn't sit right with me. The body, the unknown man, the dental records. Someone had to disappear for Daniel to live. And the records didn't match a random victim. They matched a man who had been missing for 4 months. A man with no family, no noise, no one looking. Except now, Daniel didn't kill him. Ethan arranged it, but Ethan didn't arrange it alone. The hospital override required internal clearance. The ambulance needed clearance. The paperwork needed digital authorization. This wasn't just family fraud. It was a system. And systems are harder to dismantle than people. Daniel tried to bargain. He offered testimony. He offered cooperation. He offered to expose the network. I let him speak. Because the more he talked, the smaller he became. And the smaller he became, the more I understood. He never loved the plan. He loved control. And the moment control slipped, he panicked. Ethan didn't panic. That's what made him dangerous. Even when confronted, even when faced with the coffin evidence, he kept repeating one sentence, "Prove it," which meant he believed the paperwork was still clean. And that's when I made my 5th decision. I didn't expose everything at once. I held one piece back, one document, one timestamp, one signature, because you don't win by overwhelming someone. You win by letting them believe they've survived. The hearing was scheduled 3 weeks later. Insurance fraud, identity falsification, potential homicide conspiracy. But the real tension wasn't in the courtroom. It was in the final question. Who benefits if Daniel disappears? Because even if Daniel went to prison, the assets were structured, layered, protected, unless someone knew exactly where to look. And I did. This story isn't about a fake death. It's about inheritance. Because Daniel wasn't trying to run away from me. He was trying to run towards something else. A trust fund, activated only upon verified death. And guess who administered that trust? Ethan. And now the trust was under federal review, and the funds? Frozen, all of them. But this still wasn't the final moment, because the real ending doesn't happen at the airport. It doesn't happen at the coffin. It happens when someone realizes the person they underestimated never stopped watching. The courtroom was colder than I expected. Not temperature, atmosphere. Every eye in the room moved toward me, because the implication was simple. If I authorized a transfer, was I involved? I didn't react. Inside, my pulse tightened, but I didn't react because I knew exactly which email it was. The one Daniel had tried to forge, the one he assumed I'd never trace. He underestimated one thing: metadata, and metadata doesn't lie. The prosecution requested a brief recess. In the hallway, Daniel's attorney smirked slightly. That told me something. They believed they had planted reasonable doubt, which meant Ethan had pushed that angle. Because Daniel doesn't think in layers. Ethan does. When court resumed, the prosecution called their digital forensic analyst. He walked the jury through IP addresses, routing paths, server logs, timestamp drift. The forged email originated from a private server registered under Cross Logistics Holdings, Ethan's holding company. The room tightened. For the first time, Ethan's jaw moved, just slightly. But here's where tension truly shifts. Because even as the fraud case built momentum, the homicide angle remained unstable. The body buried under Daniel's name still had no official identity confirmed. Dental records were falsified. DNA was pending, which meant the defense had a window. If the body remained anonymous, the murder conspiracy couldn't stick, and without murder, the fraud becomes survivable. And then something happened that almost broke the entire case. The DNA report returned, inconclusive. Degraded sample, partial match only. The courtroom energy shifted again. Ethan leaned back. Daniel exhaled. They believed the worst part had slipped away. And for a moment, Even I felt the ground move. Because if the homicide charge collapsed, Ethan could distance himself, blame Daniel, claim ignorance, and walk. That's when I used the document I had held back, the one I never mentioned, the one I never showed investigators early, because timing matters, especially when men believe they've survived. It wasn't DNA, it wasn't blood, it was payroll. 4 months before the crash, Cross Logistics quietly contracted a temporary driver. Cash payments, no full documentation, no long-term file. The driver's name matched the missing man, the one buried under Daniel's identity. And that driver's last recorded GPS log? At Ethan's secondary warehouse. The night before the crash, the prosecution entered it into record. Silence fell heavy. Ethan didn't react. But his lawyer did. And lawyers only panic when the structure cracks. Then came the final blow. The hospital override. The after-hours intake authorization, signed digitally by Ethan. But what no one knew was this. I had accessed my mother's estate files weeks ago. Why? Because Cross Logistics had been managing certain charitable transfers through her foundation, which meant Ethan's signature patterns were already in my possession, for years. And when you compare live digital signatures to archived originals, forgery reveals itself. The hospital override, not just illegal, clumsy. The prosecution didn't need DNA anymore. They needed motive. And motive was money. Because if Daniel died, Ethan controlled the trust. If the trust activated, funds shifted to a discretionary pool, a pool controlled by one name, Ethan Cross. The courtroom didn't explode, it imploded, quietly. Ethan finally looked at me, and in his eyes I saw it. Not anger, not fear, calculation failing. Daniel leaned toward him. "You said it was clean," he whispered. Ethan didn't answer. Because in that moment brotherhood ended. Survival began. But we're not at the end yet. Because something still wasn't sitting right. The missing man, the temporary driver. He hadn't just been convenient. He had been chosen. And when investigators dug deeper into Ethan's warehouse footage, they found something else. A private security contractor, unregistered, off books, paid through a third shell company. And that shell company didn't belong to Ethan or Daniel. It belonged to someone else. Which means this wasn't a two-man scheme. It was a system. And systems don't collapse because of one envelope. They collapse because someone stops being afraid. Daniel struck a deal first. He agreed to testify against Ethan. But his testimony revealed something unexpected. The original plan had no body. Just disappearance. Ethan insisted on a corpse. Insurance companies don't pay without closure, he had said. Closure. He used that word like strategy. The jury heard it. And juries understand one thing clearly. Greed escalated this, not desperation. But here's the moment that almost shifted sympathy. Ethan took the stand. And he didn't deny the fraud. He denied the murder. He claimed Daniel arranged the body. He claimed Daniel sourced the driver. He claimed Daniel forged the hospital override and used his company as cover. And for a moment, it sounded plausible. Because Daniel had already proven he could lie. The courtroom tension peaked. 2 brothers, 1 dead man, 1 widow, 1 insurance system, 1 missing link. And that missing link was time. Because timelines don't care about emotion, they care about sequence. And sequence betrayed Ethan. Cell tower pings, warehouse entry logs, bank authorization timestamps, all aligned to Ethan's location. Not Daniel's. Daniel was at a separate meeting, verified, documented, time-stamped. The moment the driver entered the warehouse. Ethan's phone never left the premises. And phones don't lie, unless you leave them behind. Which he didn't. Because men who think they're smarter than the system rarely consider the smallest data trail. The verdict didn't come that day. It came 2 weeks later. And those 2 weeks were worse than the courtroom, because waiting amplifies doubt. Even when you know you're right, even when the evidence stacks clean, because justice is not loud, it's slow. Daniel was convicted on fraud and conspiracy, reduced sentence for cooperation. Ethan, convicted on conspiracy and aggravated financial homicide. The body was finally identified, a man with no one watching, until someone did, but the real ending didn't happen in court, it happened in the hallway. After sentencing, Ethan walked past me in restraints. He stopped. For half a second. "You think you won," he said quietly. Not bitter, just curious. And I answered the only way that mattered. No, I paid attention, because here's the truth. No one says out loud. They didn't fail because they were reckless. They failed because they believed I was decorative, quiet, predictable, replaceable. They believed silence meant weakness. They never understood it meant observation. The coffin wasn't the ending. The airport wasn't the ending. The courtroom wasn't the ending. The ending happened the moment I decided not to react, not to scream, not to beg, just to watch. Because when people believe they've already won, they stop hiding, and that's when the real evidence appears. Everyone thinks the story ends when the gavel falls. It doesn't, that's just the public version. The real consequences happen quietly, behind doors, inside bank systems, across contracts no one reads carefully enough. And that's where I was strongest. Daniel took the deal. Reduced sentence, asset forfeiture, testimony against Ethan. He thought cooperation would protect him. It didn't, because fraud convictions trigger something most people forget about. Civil review. And civil review doesn't just look at crimes, it looks at patterns. Cross Logistics was audited from the inside out. Every subsidiary, every shell, every consulting fee. And when forensic accounting begins digging, it doesn't stop at what's illegal. It digs into what's unusual. And unusual becomes dangerous. 3 months after the trial, I received a call, not from law enforcement, from a regulatory board. They had found something during the deeper review. Transfers routed through a charitable foundation, my mother's foundation, the same foundation Ethan had managed, the same one that quietly moved funds during the months before Daniel's staged death. I went cold. Because this wasn't just business. This was family. They asked me a simple question. Did your mother authorize these transfers personally? The answer was no, because in her final months, she stopped signing anything Ethan placed in front of her. She started reviewing everything herself, and that's when something inside me aligned. Ethan didn't just want insurance money, he needed liquidity. Before the crash, before the will reading, before everything. I went back through my mother's archived emails, the ones Ethan assumed I'd never check, because grief makes people avoid inboxes. But grief never made me avoid patterns. 2 months before her death, she wrote something short. Ava, if anything feels rushed, pause it. She didn't elaborate. She didn't need to. My mother understood something about powerful men. They only rush when they're cornered. The regulatory review uncovered an internal memo, a proposal to restructure the foundation, to modernize asset flow. Ethan's language. Clean, professional, almost admirable. If you didn't know what you were reading. But inside the memo was a clause that would have shifted discretionary authority solely to him. In the event of my mother's sudden incapacity, that word again, incapacity. Men like Ethan love that word. It turns control into compassion. The timing aligned. He attempted the restructure 3 weeks before Daniel's crash, which meant something terrifying. Daniel's fake death wasn't the beginning. It was the acceleration. Because if Daniel died, insurance paid, foundation restructured, trust activated, funds centralized, all under Ethan. A perfect consolidation, except for one miscalculation, me. Here's the part no one saw. After Daniel's sentencing, Ethan's legal team requested a secondary asset evaluation. Not public, not dramatic, just quiet damage control. They tried to freeze certain holdings before civil recovery actions could expand. And that's when I made the only move that truly mattered. I didn't go to court. I went to the board. The foundation board wasn't emotional. They were procedural. Retired judges, financial analysts, people who didn't care about sibling rivalry. They cared about fiduciary breach. And fiduciary breach is lethal in elite circles. I presented the pre-accident transfers, the restructure memo, the forged override, the warehouse logs, the timeline correlation. And I didn't dramatize it. I didn't accuse. I asked a question. Does this look like stewardship? Silence is powerful in boardrooms, because silence means calculation. 3 weeks later, the foundation voted. Unanimous removal. Ethan's name was stripped from management authority. Assets frozen. Review escalated to federal oversight. He was already convicted, but now, his reputation was dismantled. And reputation is the currency men like Ethan value most. Daniel attempted to write to me once. From prison. 1 page, 3 sentences. You didn't have to destroy everything. I read it once, then folded it. Because here's what men like Daniel never understand. Exposure isn't destruction. It's consequence. But I'm not finished yet. Because there was one more loose thread. The driver, the man buried under Daniel's name. His family was notified late. Too late. No one asked questions at first. Because no one expects complexity in death. But when the full case became public, they reached out to me, not angry, confused, and that meeting changed something inside me. His sister sat across from me in a quiet cafe, hands wrapped around a coffee she never drank. He was supposed to work one night, she said softly. 1 shift, temporary contract, warehouse escort, cash payment, and then he disappeared. Ethan called it operational discretion. Daniel called it necessary structure. But to her, it was a brother who never came home. I helped them file a wrongful death civil claim. Quietly. Not for publicity, not for redemption, for closure. Because justice in court isn't always justice in reality. And closure isn't loud. It's procedural. The civil settlement was sealed, confidential, but it was large. Funded by liquidated cross-logistics assets. Liquidated under federal supervision. Ethan didn't fight it. He couldn't. Because men who lose criminal cases rarely survive civil scrutiny. The foundation survived, under new oversight, new governance, and my mother's name remained untouched. Which mattered more to me than money. Because legacy isn't inheritance. It's protection. Years later, someone asked me if I ever felt guilt. For pushing it so far, for not letting Daniel escape quietly, for not accepting a clean divorce and moving on. I answered honestly, no, because the day Daniel said, "You'll leave with nothing," he believed I would shrink, disappear, accept erasure. And the moment Ethan signed that restructure memo, he believed I wouldn't notice. They didn't fail because they were evil. They failed because they were arrogant. And arrogance leaves fingerprints everywhere. Here's the truth I learned. The staged crash wasn't the real betrayal. The forged will wasn't the real betrayal. The fake death wasn't even the real betrayal. The real betrayal was this. They believed I was ornamental. And ornamental women are invisible, until they aren't. If you believe every lie leaves proof, then you already know something important. Evidence doesn't shout. It waits, and when the right moment arrives, it doesn't explode, it corrects, and the correction is permanent. The correction didn't happen in that room. It started 3 days later, because men like Daniel don't collapse immediately. They negotiate, they threaten, they calculate, and when that fails, they panic. The first call came at 11:47 p.m. Unknown number. I let it ring twice before answering. Silence, then breathing. Not shaky. Measured. "You're making a mistake," Daniel said. No apology, no anger, just strategy. "I'm protecting myself," I replied. A pause. "You think you're safe because you found paperwork?" There it was, that word again. Found. He still believed I stumbled onto something. He didn't understand. I didn't find it. I built it. "I think I'm safe," I said calmly, "because I documented it." Another pause. Longer. "You're going to regret this." That's when I smiled. "Daniel," I said softly, "I already survived you." He hung up. And that was the moment I knew he wasn't done, which meant I couldn't be either. The next week was quiet, too quiet. No press, no public statements, no legal threats, just silence. And silence from someone like Daniel is never surrender. It's repositioning. Then came the first rumor. A board member from his firm called my lawyer, concerned. Apparently Daniel was telling people I'd fabricated evidence, that I'd been unstable for years, that this was retaliation. Retaliation, the oldest play in the book. When you can't deny proof, attack credibility. But Daniel made one mistake. He tried that narrative publicly. He forgot something about me, my career, my audit trail, my documented performance history, my compliance awards, my internal investigations, my court-verified testimony in previous cases. Men like Daniel assume silence equals fragility. It doesn't. It equals patience. Within 48 hours, my attorney filed an additional submission. Not emotional, not dramatic, professional. We attached historical financial discrepancies. 3 prior silent settlements Daniel had paid, internal emails from former employees, and an internal memo referencing reputation containment. That memo broke him because it proved pattern, not accident, pattern, and pattern destroys defense. The board suspended him pending investigation. His accounts were officially frozen, and for the first time, Daniel lost control of time. Time is power. When you can stall, you win. But he couldn't stall this. The audit was federal now. 2 weeks later, I saw him again, not in a courtroom, not in an office, in a parking garage. He looked thinner, more tired, less certain. He walked toward me like a man rehearsing something. "Ava," he said carefully, "I underestimated you." That almost sounded like respect. "Most people do," I replied. He swallowed. "You're burning everything." "No," I corrected him. "I'm illuminating it." That hit him. Because illumination exposes, more than the target. It exposes anyone standing nearby. He lowered his voice. "There are people you don't understand involved in this." There it was. The intimidation attempt, but it came too late. "You're right," I said calmly. "I don't understand them." I stepped closer. "But they understand paper trails." He went silent, and I saw it. For the first time, fear. Not fear of me, fear of inevitability. The indictment didn't come loudly. It arrived as an email. Federal inquiry expanded. Asset concealment. Fraud. Conspiracy. Conspiracy. That word travels, and when it travels, it takes reputations with it. Lena tried to contact me once. I didn't answer. She left a message. "I didn't know," she said through tears. "He told me you were weak. He told me you'd fold." Fold. I almost laughed. The next morning, Daniel's name was removed from the firm website. No announcement, no explanation, just absence. And absence, in high circles, is louder than scandal. 3 months later, the divorce was finalized. Not on his terms, not on mine, on documented terms. Full disclosure, asset restoration, legal accountability, no screaming, no scenes, just signatures. The final court appearance was brief. Daniel tried one last time. "Ava," he said quietly, "I never meant for it to go this far." That sentence, that exact sentence. Men say it when they realize the distance wasn't emotional, It was structural. You didn't mean for me to notice, I corrected. He had no response. The judge signed, and just like that, it was over. But here's the part no one talks about. Justice doesn't feel loud. It doesn't feel triumphant. It feels balanced, like something that was leaning too long, finally corrected its posture. I walked out of that courthouse alone, not because I had no one, because I didn't need anyone there. The press didn't approach me. They approached him, and he kept his head down. That's how power collapses, quietly. 6 months later, a mutual acquaintance asked me something. Was it worth it? She said, all that fight. I thought about the envelope, the table, the smile, and I answered honestly, it wasn't a fight. She frowned. It was documentation, because revenge is loud, but evidence waits. And when the right moment arrives, it doesn't explode, it corrects, and the correction is permanent. If you enjoyed this story, subscribe to The Final Evidence, because every lie leaves proof.